Welcome back to the channel, and this is our week 4 reflective account. So we looked at how different groups are portrayed. So we looked at in sports. So we looked at things like black and versus white athletes, and male versus female, and how those different athletes are portrayed in the media. Also looked how the media creates stories. So things like underdogs in certain matchups, and we've just had the Super Bowl, so with certain players retiring at the end of the season, and how kind of going along with the underdog sort of story, the athletes who have come from nothing, essentially. So they do a lot of work around that, and how that sort of ties into the commentary of sport, and how commenters are not just talking about the game, what's happening, but they're talking about the players and kind of creating a narrative within that. We also did an in-line press release, in-class press release. So that was an interesting task. I think me struggled. Well, the grade reflects that I did struggle a little bit with it. I think mainly because I forgot the main aspects of the 5 W's, and coming up with some sort of big title at the beginning. So it was an interesting task to do that in class. It's quite quite paced, kind of we got it and read it and have to do it in class, but definitely learned a lot from it. So we wanted to look how males and females were portrayed in mainstream media, and just taking a look at a few of Sports Illustrated and other magazine covers, you can see the clear difference. So with male athletes, they are first of all, they're usually in uniform, looking heroic, strong and powerful within their respected sports, and it's all about them succeeding in the sport. It's nothing else is kind of that's this selling point with the male athletes. With the females, it's a lot different. So they are usually, it's not about them and their sport. It's usually they're sort of feminized or sexualized. So here we have sort of Candace Parker, WNBA player, pregnant again, and here another one sort of looking in the camera is suggestive, sort of nothing to do with sports. So when you compare both of them together, there is a clear difference how they're portrayed in the media, and of course on these magazines as well. Now, doing some research behind this was, for me, quite interesting, because personally I thought female sports, majority across the board, was sort of going down or was stable but at a very low rate. But contrary to that, has been on the rise, especially things like basketball, cricket, and soccer. For me, I tend not to watch a lot of cricket or a lot of live basketball, or a lot of female soccer as well. So perhaps my first estimations were probably not fair, because I'm not involved all around those sports. So with that sort of rise in numbers, so it's kind of it's split in terms of sort of networks and how they feel about it. So some are sort of happy with the TV viewership, say women's sports is kind of doing all right, while others sort of say that it needs to be higher. So again, speaking to agendas, there's certain networks that are probably okay to kind of leave female sport where it is, not give it too much attention, and kind of give this idea that actually they're doing okay, when perhaps some would argue they're not, while others were clearly saying that the numbers are rising, and it's good that they're rising, because there is a difference between, obviously, the viewership between male sport and female sport. So yes, there is sort of an agenda that goes with that, depending on the news network that you read from, whether that they feel TV viewership in female sports sort of matters, or if it doesn't. So I tried to look into some research to see why, for someone like me, why women's sports seems so far off. So there was a study done that looked at sort of the use of social media between men and women's basketball teams in the collegiate level in the Southern East Conference. Schools, teams, or sorry, schools like Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, have a really good sports program. So with this, you can kind of see the difference in terms of the social media. Of course, with all these sports, men's basketball on the collegiate level as well tends to be have the higher viewership. It's interesting to think whether what goes first is it because is the viewership higher because there are more social media presence, or is the social media presence higher because there's generally more interest in the male sports? Regardless of both of them, it's clear that social media does play a part in the viewership of both these sports. So again, sort of diving in deeper into women's sports and sort of misconceptions around that, I kind of found sort of 4 things that I didn't know about, so I kind of wanted to share those things. So one myth is that women's sport doesn't get enough coverage. While generally, the bigger events such as like the Super Bowl, the NBA Finals, and FIFA World Cup finals generally, obviously those are male participated, generally get the most viewership. Things like tennis, figure skating, and women's athletic championships are often more popular in the US than the men's, so they get a lot of coverage in that. So there are some sports that the women do take the crown in. Another one is about men and watching women's sports. So I found a few studies that show that men outnumber females by 2 to 1 in viewership of major events. Those include things like WNBA. So 60% of the WNBA viewership is actually men. So that's all common misconception about how men won't watch women's sports is for some sports not actually true. That they're actually majority of the viewership are the males. So women's sports leagues are viable. At the moment, it would show that this is not true. So the Women's Pro Soccer League actually folded after 5 years due to lack of resources, and the National Women's Soccer League, as it is now, is actually being financed quite a bit by the MLS, and it's the same with the WNBA. That they would have folded after a few years if it wasn't for the backing of the NBA. However, the WNBA have just recently secured a 12 million ESPN deal that should help them out, which is I believe one of the biggest sponsorship deals in female sports, so perhaps that's up on the rise. And lastly, about women and the sort of attire. So there's things about sort of with beach volleyball and how supposedly if women were dressed more sort of less clothing that people would watch it more is not true. You can see this with things like if this was true, then things like lingerie football would be thriving, but it's simply not. So those are just a few things that I found in my research. So I wanted to look at underdogs in sport and kind of where I've seen sort of it take place in the media, and so kind of looked at why we root for underdogs, and it's because we like to take pleasure in the misfortune of others, and we kind of like to kind of see teams that win every year, and we kind of root for them to lose. So if we take Golden State Warriors for example, so they've been hugely successful for the past few years, and they've kind of almost been turned into the villain by the media, and certain media outlets have even sort of called them out for making the NBA finals boring, and some have even sort of credited them for the viewership dropping, kind of again talking about media agenda and kind of how they can sort of be the reason why people not like a team or dislike an athlete because of sort of their portrayal of that. Then if we look into sort of things a bit closer to home, so in the UK we sort of have a very pessimistic attitude towards sport, and again, this is where I kind of feel that sort of culture is being reflected in the media, because we don't necessarily like to see success, and we kind of enjoy beating ourselves down. So you can see a couple of articles from some of the England football coaches. As you can see, the media kind of like to sort of create sort of a little bit of drama within the team, and if we're not doing very well, they like to beat down on it. We kind of see it sort of change with that this summer, with sort of the whole nation getting behind the team, and kind of getting behind this whole football's coming home thing with the World Cup. And you can see the narrative within the media has changed. So a lot of these articles now are sort of thanking the England team and kind of showing their pride for them, which is something we haven't seen. And it goes along with the research that shows that we get joy, more joy out of unexpected success, which again is reflected here in the media. So finally, I wanted to highlight a report that I heard about before back home in my home institution. This was looking about racial and gender stereotypes in collegiate sports. So we're looking at basketball here, and how sort of language within the game, within the commentators, and how that was reflected. We're going to look mainly at the black and white athletes here. So the notion behind the study was that black athletes tend to be characterized with innate natural athletic ability, so things like see their speed, power, agility and athleticism, while white athletes are seen to be, or portrayed as, having the leadership qualities and the mental aspect of the game, and also portrayed to be more hard-working. So they've worked harder at their craft, while black athletes tend to just be naturally sort of better. So we find that in sort of the language within the commentators, and it seemed to be that white announcers generally have, or said that the report said they're generally to be more the primary problem in terms of language when discussing black and white athletes, and how the white athletes are, like I said, portrayed to be with the intelligence and hard working, while the black athletes are more physically powerful and those sort of things. And again, it's just like kind of this thing where the media can play, maybe in this case not even knowing, but can play a big part in sort of the stigma behind black and white athletes. And we saw it a little bit in football as well. In American football, black athletes are seen, black quarterbacks are seen to be sort of the athletic ones, the quick ones, the ones that will run around and sort of make these big highlight plays, while white quarterbacks might not necessarily have that same physical sort of prowess, but they're known better to read defenses and have that intelligence in the game. And yes, like I said, we've seen it in the sort of language of the commentators, and it's definitely had played some effects in the NFL, where certain black quarterbacks have actually, some experts have said that they should change position to a wide receiver, which of course is less mentally or needed less mental aspects in that game. So definitely you can see how the media can play their part in this. So that's all for this week. Once again, thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.